Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to those of you who are evening applies. Welcome to the Q-Files. We're back on the ISDN line. Let me tell you this. It's taken about 5 technicians over 5 days to undo what the nasty people have done to mess up my lines. I got to tell you with that, it's amazing to me. The only way I'm able to use my system tonight is to go through some auxiliary 1010 number, and we'll do that and hopefully get something remedied. But, I mean, it has been a fiasco beyond anything I have ever experienced. You know, if you think things are getting better in this country and that we're on our way to a new and wonderful society, think again. I can tell you point blank that no one seems to care any longer. It seems, and it appears, that the meltdown is being engineered so that ultimate frustration, that people who have been used to doing business one way, as I have, it will be almost impossible for the small businesses to exist. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think tonight, before I get into the practical survival, I think what I'm going to do, just because I can't avoid the pressing issues of the day, is go the first half hour with the news and then the second half hour with the preparation. Again, we won't run out of stuff to talk about. Tonight we're going to start with water, just because a lot of people say food first. I disagree with that. You can go 4 weeks almost without food. You can't go more than 3 days without water. And my guess is most people would be having a hard time at 2 days without water for what it's worth. Now, today Japan has stopped buying the dollar. And here's the fascinating consideration. We're hearing events out of the East that are troubling, and I'm talking the Far East. But today, the big story is largely gone unnoticed by most, but it will be brought to your attention. Now, listen to this. Japan's mammoth effort to curb the strength of the yen was abandoned in April when authorities ceased intervening in the currency markets for the first time in 7 months. The finance ministry said it bought no dollars last month, having spent about $137 billion on intervention so far this year, including a monthly record of about 7 billion yen in January. Now, the decision to end intervention sends out a strong message that the Japanese policymakers believe their country's recovery from a decade of deflation is broadening from exports to domestic sections of the economy. It also promises to remove a growing source of tension with the U.S., where manufacturers have accused the Japanese government of keeping the currency artificially low to boost exports. However, now listen to this. Here's the bottom line, and I always like the bottom line right at the top, like eating dessert first. The decision to halt the purchase of U.S.-denominated assets could have negative implications for U.S. Treasury bonds, which have been boosted by strong buying from Asian governments led by Japan and China. At the start of last month, the yen rose to a 4-year high of 103.4 yen against the dollar, but has since weakened to 110.2, partly due to improving outlook on the U.S. economy. The record 35 billion yen intervention it began in January last year as the authorities tried to prevent a stronger yen from strengthening the export growth. In other words, as Japan interfered and manipulated its foreign exchange rates and ratios, they were able to get us in the United States to buy more of their stuff. Now, with the yen strengthening and the dollar weakening, the whole economy has a new set of question marks. Now, here's what this means, and we'll just get to the bottom line. Who's going to buy our paper, you guys? Now, according to Governor Bernanke, they'll just print money until the cows come home. His attitude pretty much said it all. We've got the power, and they've got the desire, so with the power and desire, guess they're going to print money. But it's fascinating to me that when you look at the real cost of food, the real cost of energy, the real cost of everything, it's going up, up, up. Even guys that mow lawns. You've got to realize in the summer a lot of people have a lawn mowing business. If they're using power mowers, the cost is going to factor into what they charge and what they can hope to recover in their own business. Now, again, there was a story on WorldNet Daily, and some others were carrying the same story, that people are preferring gasoline financially over food because obviously they only have so much money and they've got to get back and forth to their places of employment. And so when it comes to working or living within a budget, the first thing they've got to acquire is their fuel. Now, knowing that, don't you think the New World Order puppet masters are going to capitalize on that to the extent that you're going to see record profits with the oil companies? Meanwhile, the sheep are buying, and they don't understand that it's kind of like a sheep going for a checkup. They're probing the sheep just to see how much pain they will in turn endure. The question is, and I was answered last week, how close to $3 would gasoline have to get before people start to react? I was noticing on Jim Sinclair's mindset, and his website is J as in jumping, S as in Sam, JS Mine, MINESET.com, that his expectation is that at $50 a barrel oil, we'll see $5 per gallon gas. Now, at $5 per gallon gas, that's something that Rolaids and every Aunt Addison, including Maalox, isn't going to be able to solve that gas problem because it's going to be more and more destructive than we think. Now, should Al-Qaeda and the crew get away with blowing up the biggest oil terminal in the world in Saudi Arabia, especially where they load their tanker ships, it could be a fascinating turn of events, and it could happen quite quickly. I am convinced, everyone, that that's the name of the game, to strangle the West and to literally cause massive financial confusion. And again, it's important that I think we bring up some items that it's very, very important. In a book that was written called Spetsnaz by Viktor Suvorov, and thanks, Tom, for sending me this, Viktor Suvorov talked about how this whole end-time strategy, the Soviet strategy, is going to take place. Now, I'll give you the pages, but everybody, you should get this book, Spetsnaz, or as they say, Spetsnaz, by Viktor Suvorov, Suvorov. And I'm quoting now from different pages, because I suggest to you that the planning that's going on and the terrorism in the world that's taking place, this is part of the grand plan. Don't think that the Russians and all of their war machine don't understand the nature of the West and the capitalists that have sold them the rope to ultimately hang themselves on. But I'm going to give you some Suvorov quotes, and here's one. But therein lies the Soviet strategy. Remain neutral until the enemy exhausts himself in battle against, and they put someone else, but we'll say Iraq, then strike a sudden blow. And now, on page 176, describing how Spetsnaz would be used at the beginning of the war, all these operations, quote, because of course none of these events is an accident, and others like them, are officially known in the GRU as the preparatory period, and unofficially as the overture. The overture is a series of large and small operations, the purpose of which is before the actual military operation begins, to weaken the enemy's morale, create an atmosphere of general suspicion, fear and uncertainty, and divert the attention of the enemy's armies and police forces to a huge number of different targets, each of which may be the object of the next attack. Does this sound like textbook stuff? Listen to this. The overture is carried out by the agents of the Soviet satellite countries and mercenaries recruited by intermediaries. The principal method employed at the stage is gray terror. That is a kind of terror which is not conducted in the name of the Soviet Union. The Soviet secret services do not at this stage leave their visiting cards or leave other people's cards. Listen to this. The terror is carried out in the name of already existing terrorist groups not connected in any way to the Soviet Union. The GRU reckons that this period, its operation be regarded as, and you're going to love this, natural disasters, actions by forces beyond human control, mistakes committed by people, or a terrorist not connected with the Soviet Union. Does this sound like HARP and everything else all rolled into one? And the words, by the way, are emphatic. Page 178 states this: but between the gray and the red terror, there may be an intermediate period, the pink terror, when active military operations have not yet begun. There's still peace, but when some of the best Spetsnaz units have already gone into action. I've told you that Oleg Kalugin, former head of GRU and a division of it, that Defect the West, talked about lighting forest fires and using the cover of natural disasters and initiating natural disasters to basically soften up the target. We're being softened up, ladies and gentlemen. The pink terror may continue for no more than a few hours, but those are the most important hours and minutes, the very last hours and minutes of peace. He goes on to describe possible pink terror operations as being assassination of key government leaders and TV personalities. Probably want to add radio to that, too. The purpose of which is to take away familiar faces who may be trusted news or government officials. This will accelerate an atmosphere of suspicion. If the reader had access to real dossiers on the secret agents of Spetsnaz, he'd be disappointed and probably shocked because the agents of Spetsnaz bear no resemblance to the fine upstanding heroes of spy films. Soviet military intelligence is looking for an entirely different type of person as a candidate for recruitment. A portrait of an ideal agent for Spetsnaz emerges something like this. A man between 55 and 65 years of age who has never served in the Army, never had access to secret documents, does not carry or own a weapon, knows nothing of hand-to-hand fighting, does not possess any secret equipment, and does not support the communists, does not read the newspapers, was never in the Soviet Union, has never met any Soviet citizens, leads a lonely, introspective life far from other people, and is by profession a forester, a fisherman, a lighthouse keeper, a security guard, or a railwayman. In many cases, such an agent will be a physical invalid. Spetsnaz is also on the lookout for women with roughly the same characteristics. If Spetsnaz has such a person as Nazareth, that means A, they are not under any suspicion on the part of the local police or security services, and B, in that event of any inquiries being made, he will be the last person suspected. That there is practically nothing by which suspicion could be confirmed, which in turn means that in peacetime, the agent is almost totally guaranteed against the danger of failure or arrest. And finally, that in the event of war, he will remain in the same place as he was in peacetime and not be taken into the army or the public service under wartime mobilization. I have often wondered why Muslim types tend to cluster around small businesses like motels, convenience stores, and gas stations. He says, I have a couple of Muslim friends who tell me that it seems that all Muslims have a rich uncle somewhere who will willingly bankroll acquisition of small businesses. I think we can assume that Al-Qaeda has studied both the Soviet and American special ops doctrines. What better people to put in place than people with access to motels, rooming, shelter, convenience stores, food, drinks, cash, and gas stations, fuel, food, lots of cash, and credit card numbers. A network like this can be covert to overt. Covert in the sense of providing cash, shelter, food, fuel, etc. to the actual operatives. Overt in the sense of contaminating gas supplies, contaminating food supplies, withholding gas during times of short supply, forcing people to buy from other stations, causing long lines and empty pumps. When you really begin to think about the war on terror, you see we are in a real pickle. And the main reason is this insane open border policy of the globalists. Now, that was Thomas's kind of overview, but I think he brings out an important point. I have said that the fingerprints of Spetsnaz are surrounding the events of the world. Again, I read that book, Tom and others, a number of years ago, and I know that Jeff Nyquist has talked extensively and written about it. But I think what most people cannot understand is asymmetric warfare, and this is what we're dealing with terrorism. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with the droughts and with the absence of water, if you were going to start a fire and wanted to use it as a gray tear, the softening up of your target, would you do it in a wet year or would you do it in a dry year? And then if you knew that it was ultimately a nation's war-making policy in coordination with the New World Order that was also causing harmonic disturbances in the electromagnetic spectrum causing weather warfare and weather modification, would you not think that the softening up period could be enhanced and accelerated? You see, again, most people cannot even begin to identify what they truly believe any longer or what they stand for any longer. And I think, I forget who made the quote, but he who fails to stand for something will fall for anything. I think Jesus said it better when he said, if it weren't for the days being shortened, even the elect could be or would be deceived. You see, again, in the realm of the spirit, it's not enough to see what's the event. You have to see beyond the event. The Apostle Paul talks about our battle is not against the things that we see, but more against the things we don't see. And again, I make this statement, it drives atheists and agnostics absolutely over the edge. So what a delightful thought, is that the things which are made and which are seen are made out of things which aren't seen. And I always wonder, and I guess I've never seen it firsthand, but those, I can tell you, I have seen some agnostics, but I've never seen atheists in the presence of real demon possession or demon activity. I've seen agnostics who, quite interestingly, become believers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's stated in Ephesians 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. And that's why the Apostle Paul spent so much time trying to teach the Ephesians that the weapons of their warfare were not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. The denigration of the Word of God, the attack on the person of Jesus Christ, the perversion of the Word of God and of history, such as in the Da Vinci Code, and I got to tell you something. It's amazing to me. You can always find the presence of evil spirits in the realm of weird sexuality. It's like the spirits that once inhabited some of the most wicked men and women in history. When the men or women died, those evil spirits basically go looking for a new home, but they still have their appetites and desires, and they wish to express them through humans. So can you imagine when you get some egomaniac, power-happy, sex-crazed New World Order guy that's just willing to sell his soul and the soul of everybody else he comes into contact for what I would call temporary power, control, and domination, that the temporary power, control, and domination are the bait at which the devil so carefully crafts his trade to hook these people, not only into performing his will, but ultimately into eternally damning their soul. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're at a time period where to say that it's odd, unusual, strange, perplexing, curious, intriguing, and any other word I could come up with on the spot is an understatement. These are times that have never been seen before. Therefore, if we are experiencing things we've never seen before, and times and seasons that we got a glimpse of years ago looking into the future, and now we are possessing that time frame, then you can understand why current vocabulary will probably have to adapt to be able to express in contemporary word frames the events that we see taking place. I'll give you an example. People used to send me, my detractors used to send me that, oh, you're always saying the sky is falling. Well, I got news for you. When the meteors start crashing to Earth in record numbers, which we haven't seen anything yet, maybe that will get their attention. Fortunately, there are so many events taking place that around the world that are of an astronomical nature, that are of a supernatural nature, in my opinion. And for the record, let me share this. I was in Yellowstone Park again on Sunday. I went down to Canyon. I went and looked. Canyon is where the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is, and where one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the whole country is. But I can tell you this, that Norris, nothing had changed. Lake, nothing had changed. And that, again, ladies and gentlemen, a guy, let me share this with you. I can't even find it or I'd read it. Somebody claiming to be a prophet sent me an email saying this is the third time and basically challenging me to give the word of the Lord that Yellowstone's going to blow up. Well, first of all, the spirit of the prophets is subject to the prophets, and said, let the prophets speak and the other prophets judge. I can only tell you this, that I don't care if 50 people say it's going to blow up, and I'm not trying to be a hothead on this because I believe in prophecy, and I believe that God has more than warned the United States continually for probably in excess of, if you go into George Washington's vision, for the last, 300 years. But the point is that the prophetic witness to an event also has to be in a multitude of prophets. The other prophets are to judge. So for that person who's listening, if you can continue, you can send it to me all you want. You can curse me because I won't read your prophecy on the air. But I can tell you this, at this point, it does not bear witness with my spirit, with what I know, and with what I'm doing. Now, look, it's my radio show. I'm charged with the responsibility and the accountability before the living God to answer to Him for it, and I simply will not just go out there unless something really rings true. And at this point, again, I'll say this with you, spending 12 hours in Yellowstone Park on Saturday, and there's hardly anybody there. I can only tell you this, again, I've now probably got in excess of 5,000 images of Yellowstone and no indication. In order to get my attention, somebody asked me that question. Here's what I would have to see. I would have to see thousands of earthquakes continuing on for several weeks with no interruption. In other words, a continual rumbling. I can't tell you how many people get flipped out when Yellowstone has a 3.4 or a 4.5 or a 5.2 earthquake. In the scope of the geologic and seismic history of Yellowstone, it is of no consequence at this point. Now, here's the deal. I'm talking the natural. Should either China or Russia use their scalar weaponry, and here's the big if, then all bets are off, ladies and gentlemen. And obviously they know exactly the situation, not only in Yellowstone, but also in the Long Valley Caldera. And if you watch the NBC show last night, 10.5, you know that it starts in the Pacific Northwest, heads down the coast, ultimately into the Long Valley Caldera around Mammoth Mountains, then hits San Francisco, and tonight, L.A. gets wiped out. Well, by the way, have any of you noticed, you know what really makes me mad? That all the women in that show are the strong-willed ones, and all the men, whether the guy playing the director of FEMA or the girl's boyfriend, I forget her name, the one that's right, and the guy who's kind of been an unhelpful, as Donald Rumsfeld would say up until the moment. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed the basically that the men are wimps in the movie and the women are strong? And again, I think it's fascinating because I've noticed that on the commercials too. The women can be just drop dead gorgeous, and the guys look like they came out of the geek factory. So there is a subliminal message being sent there, and it's probably, and please, I'm not anti-women. All I'm saying is Hollywood is doing their best to emasculate the American male on the cinema and put in its place some kind of androgynous, thin, not very, kind of like what I call the fly people. And the fly people are those that they can cast in the worst possible light, and it's not somebody that you'd want to invite in, it's somebody you'd want to shoo away. If any of you others out there who have been noticing that agree, fine. If not, but I just draw your attention to that. Watch tonight on NBC, those of you who are going to watch the 10.5 super earthquake. And I got to tell you something, it must have hit a nerve because both, who was it? NASA threw a fit over the movie. The government, the federal government threw a fit over the movie. So again, if it's all just hype to get people to watch, it's one thing. And look, there are some cornball effects. But I think the major theme that I got out of last night's version of 10.5 was simply this, is that no matter how much evidence, they're not going to tell anybody ahead of time. They're only going to cover their behinds at the time. Now, again, we've got a fabulous amount of heretofore non-experienced events taking place. We've got the potential for massive bioterrorism on a scale that most people can't imagine. And quite candidly, I've now come to the conclusion that it is simply beyond the mind of most people to fathom the degree of disruption. Look, we all want equilibrium, don't we? And that equilibrium makes us comfortable. And if you look at the history of our forefathers, how hard they fought, how hard they worked, their saving ethics before credit cards, that people with a husband working could send their kids to school. And then you destroy the American family, and you insert in its place either a homosexual, either a gay or lesbian family. And look at, again, the roles being absolutely destroyed. You've got women thinking they're men in a lesbian relationship, and then you've got men thinking they're women in a homosexual relationship, and not always the case. I'm just saying that look at the way everything is changing. I got news for you. We ain't seen nothing yet. And again, meanwhile, with the new perversions coming out of the torture out of Iraq, look, who do you think is behind torture? It's not just the bad guys or the good guys, it's the devil and it's evil spirits. And again, I would say this, that a really good way of discerning the time is look what a person says. Like, a good example is Alan Dershowitz, okay? Alan Dershowitz went on record as stating that he favored torture. Well, I can guarantee he wouldn't favor it if it was him being done to him. And as one of the defendants of all the horrific acts of the Holocaust, he seems to want to give it back tenfold. Now, I can think of this is that anybody who wants to partake of torture is probably not realizing the control of something other than a human spirit. Because again, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't just end with torture. It ultimately ends with dismemberment, and the only thing that hasn't happened in the battlefield at this point is cannibalism. Although if you talk to the World War II vets that came out of New Guinea and a lot of the South Pacific Islands, and for the record, the Japanese probably didn't even recognize the fact that when they were in the Solomon Islands, that cannibalism in the South Pacific was a normal practice for a lot of years throughout all of the South Pacific. So again, we've got a series of events taking place now where anything goes, and in that period where anything goes, most people will simply have a very difficult time and of getting their minds around some of this stuff. And it's amazing to me what we're doing. Let's see what this says. In 50 years. Steve, in less than 50 years, we've gone from Robert Young and Father Knows Best to Homer Simpson. Hollywood has made men a bunch of dopes. Well, if you see who heads up most of the studios, I think you'll figure why. They create everything in their image and likeness. And it's amazing that it's totally, how do I say this, beyond most cognizant thought, and therefore I think you got to get into the supernatural realm to explain it. Okay, let's go to this next one. Let's say, hi, Steve. Rick, I never said the economy is recovering. Here's one I don't understand. You keep mentioning about the economy recovering. I'm not saying that. I'm reading reports. I am absolutely of the conviction. Now, Rick, please, don't make me crazy here. There is no recovery. I'm the guy talking about the gas prices going up. I'm the guy talking about, so how do you get I'm talking about the economy recovering? Either you're wrong or it's time for me to leave the radio because I cannot make myself clear. Now, I'm going to read this whole email. If anybody else has anybody, I want to do a poll on the air now because I'm frustrated. Have you ever heard me say the economy is recovering? Have you ever heard me say it other than read something on the air?